Well, we've got a hugely subscribed session today. Thanks to everyone for booking in. It's lovely to see all your names pop up so that you can learn a little bit more about what there is to know about medical room rental. It's something that I get asked about a lot, and it's also something that there's a lot of misunderstandings about. So today I wanted to run this session to take you through the terminology that lawyers use in relation to room rental, and also the different types of arrangements that you can have for room rental for your medical practice. All right. I always start with a disclaimer. It's important because I also have indemnity insurance. So this presentation is for general guidance only. There's been some people emailing me with questions already today. Please feel free to ask as many questions as you like, and I will answer them to the best of my ability. But if you've got specific complicated issues, then absolutely legal advice should be given in relation to those particular issues before taking action. So you might have been thinking about renting a room that's empty out in your medical practice to an allied health practitioner to help with your practice's bottom line. What do you need to know before you find someone? I guess from the financial perspective, it's something that is definitely worth talking about with your accountants and business advisors, because as I understand it, it is always more productive or worthwhile to have a doctor renting a room rather than an allied health professional. But there's some practices that we've been working with who are looking specifically at renting rooms to allied health professionals. They might be particular specialists that it's really helpful for them to have a specialist physio in their practice, or there's some practices that are finding it so hard to have their patients' mental health plans done that they're bringing a psychologist into the practice so that they can know when their patients can see the psychologist in their particular area. So there's lots of reasons to consider this. It's not all financial, but I think that just seems to be something that does drive a conversation if you have empty rooms. So let's keep going. Learning outcomes, what you're going to learn today, the key differences between a lease and a license. So that's what I mentioned with the terminology. A lease, what's a lease, what's a sublease, and what's a license. We'll go through that in this session today. The different rights and obligations that are afforded to each party when you're renting out a space. So what's your responsibility as the landlord, and what's the tenant's responsibility as the tenant? And I'll use that terminology regardless of the name of the agreement, just to keep it simple rather than using licensor and licensee. And there's lots of different terms, but it can get confusing. I just think landlord and tenant is the best way to do it. And the best way to structure a room rental as well, because there can be different ways to do it when depending on who's renting the room. And we'll talk about that. So who am I? Is the next thing. If you don't know, my name's Sarah Bartholomeusz. I run a corporate law firm that helps doctors, and in particular medical practices and allied health practices as well, with the legals for their business. I know you guys as doctors and practice managers have so many things on your lists, so I just try and keep things as simple as I can, and also really take the opportunity to educate the community as well. So there I am. That's a picture of me reading my third book, Growing a Medical Practice from Frustration to a High Performance Business, and it's now in its second edition. We did a COVID edition that includes telehealth and all of the changes from last year that are now relevant in the world in which we live in. It's also on Audible, which was fun to record and means that people can listen while they're doing their washing or walking their dog, which I always do myself with audiobooks. It's a lot of fun. So critical issues for today: correctly diagnosing the agreement that you need to rent out a room. So this presentation does assume that you have a lease of your premises. That might not be the case for everyone. Some doctors own the premises and might not have formal lease in place, but it's relevant in the terminology anyway. You'll get a lot out of this session. So sublease versus license. So if you have a lease, then you can offer a sublease of that lease or a license agreement. And I think a lot of people in medical practices that I talk to say, don't I always need a sublease? And the answer to that is actually no, because a sublease might be offering more than you need to. So a lease is an agreement where a property owner, through a registered agreement, mostly leases are registered on the title, like a mortgage gets registered on a title, grants exclusive rights to their property for a specified period in return for the payment of rent. And so the exclusive part of a lease might be what doesn't necessarily work if you're just renting out a room to an allied health professional. We know that some practices want the flexibility of being able to use the room at other times, where if the allied health person is only in, for example, 3 days a week, they want the flexibility to be able to use that room for a couple of other days a week, or it makes it difficult to give a lease to one room if people also need to use the kitchen, or they also need to use a car park, or they also need to use the toilets. These are shared amenities that usually, if you had a lease, you would have the exclusive right to, but in the situation we're talking about here, they don't necessarily have that. And so I'm not going to go into pathology leases a lot in this session, but pathology leases, I think, can often be drafted as leases. The pathology companies draft them, but more properly, if we're acting for the medical centre, we'll have that as a license agreement. And the next slide will explain why. I'm not going to go into pathology leases a lot in this session because it's a whole different beast, to be honest. But if you do need advice on pathology leases, then we're very happy to talk to you outside of this session if you need to. So the important features of a lease: it creates more than a contractual right to enter and use the premises. It creates an interest in the land. So in the same way, when you buy a property and you get a mortgage on it and the bank has a right to re-enter if you're not paying your mortgage, that's how a lease works as well. You enter the property and you have the exclusive right to use it, and it runs with the land as well. The rights pass if there's a transfer from one owner to another. We had a client recently who had a big landlord, and the landlords, very surprisingly, had court action for the bank to re-enter. And in that case, they were worried that if the landlord, if the bank re-entered, the bank would sell the property, and then the new owner would not want them there, and they'd need to find another space. And they'd only just moved in, and it was all a big crisis. But because they had a registered lease on the land, that wasn't ever going to happen. If the bank did sell the property and the new owner bought it, their right to be in that space would run with the new owner. So it's very powerful in that sense. So the next question is, when would you need a license? So a license is when a landlord grants temporary use of their property for a specific purpose to another party through a contract in return for the payment of rent. So it's a much more flexible arrangement than a lease, and In fact, a lot of practitioner services agreements that we've been drafting over the last few months also include a license for the doctor to use the room, as well as receive the administrative services that they do from the practice for the service fee that they pay to the practice. And they have the right to use that room only when they're there in the practice, so only when they're rostered. It's not an exclusive right to use that room, but it's still a right to use the room. So unlike a lease, a license does not give the other party any right to exclusive possession over the property or premises. The important features of a license include permission to enter or use the property of another, to cover a shorter period of time. So leases often require a commitment for a longer period of time, and sometimes landlords will ask for 5 years or 5 + 5 + 5, depending on the investment that they've made in the property that you've potentially asked for. Whereas licenses can be a lot more flexible in terms of timing. I think I have a license. I work from a big shared office of professional services firm, and I need to give 3 months notice if I want to find another office, and they need to give me 3 months notice, so that gives me time to find a new office. Or that time can even be negotiated down. So there was another lawyer who left this office recently, and he negotiated to give 30 days notice because he had an offer to move his firm to another firm, and the landlord agreed to that. So there's a lot of flexibility in a license agreement, and usually either party has the right to terminate, which I just covered with my own arrangement. If my landlord wanted a partner of their accounting firm to move into my office, they might give me a full 3 months notice, or they might offer me a different office within the office that I already rent, and maybe they'd sweeten the deal a little bit by giving me a rent-free period. I don't know. I don't want to move offices, so I'm not going to entertain that too far. And also a license agreement can cover shared areas like bathrooms, kitchens, and even the reception area. So my arrangement covers reception. The receptionists here receive my packages and let me know when they're there. And if I have guests coming or clients coming to the office, then I'll use the rooms upstairs as well. So that explains the flexibility of it, because in the professional services office that I'm in, there's just not enough people. And so there's a lot of capacity to be able to offer those extras. You can also offer extras as part of a license agreement, like the use of the coffee machine, or the practice might buy the milk, and that might be a shared milk or shared dry biscuits, or whatever it is that you offer for the other people that work in the practice. You can also offer as part of your license arrangement as well. So the benefits of using a license rather than a lease for the spare room in your practice is, if you do have a startup allied health practitioner who fits in well with your clientele, and you think that you have shared values and it would be a good match, it's a great way to produce extra revenue if you're not going to put a doctor in there, or there's no opportunity to put a pathology department in there if you don't already have one. It's very flexible compared to a lease. It is convenient because of that flexibility, and it can really work very well for both parties. Oh, I'm going to cough, sorry. Getting too excited, I think. A license agreement is also a lot simpler than a lease, and it can be less expensive to set up because you go back to back with your existing head lease, and because it's not a super long-term arrangement, you don't really negotiate the terms like you might a lease in so much detail. So that is a great flexibility as well. If you're considering renting rooms within your medical premises, now you know that you have options. So pathology subleases and the Red Book, that really is a whole nother story. And I can, if there's an appetite for it, I'd love to hear from you in terms of what your issues are with pathology leases, and if you've got questions about them, maybe I can do another webinar on those, because I know there are a lot of questions out there in the market about the Red Book. It is a fun discussion topic. So if you do need a license agreement, we've actually created an online solution to help make it a lot more cost effective and a lot simpler for health practices to get a license agreement for their practice. And it includes us checking your head lease to make sure that all of the terms align. It's available on this link here. We'll include it in the email after the session, as well as the replay. And I always love talking to doctors and practice managers. So if you do want to have a talk to me about your specific situation, I'd love to talk to you. If you book into my calendar there, I've got spaces over the next few weeks, and would love to hear your particular questions. Although my team have told me that you guys are so busy at the moment that we are doing a shorter session today, because they think that you don't want to be watching me talk about the law for an hour. So I'd love your feedback on that. I'd love to take any questions. And also, if you haven't joined our Facebook group, You Legal for Doctors, you're very welcome to. We're live streaming in there right now, and we put lots of little gifts for you. The most recent one is our casual conversion template. So if you are looking to convert casual staff to part-time employees, there's some templates in there to help you get started with that rather than having to invent the wheel. So, all right, I will end the webinar now, and we'll be in touch, I'm sure.